Can everybody hear me okay? Beautiful. Well, Almaz, thank you so much. It has been a wonderful association with Almaz through the African Diaspora Network, and personally, you've really enriched my life and opened my eyes to a number of different things. I'm grateful to IBM and all of those who are assembled on today's call who came to hear a little bit about my thoughts and I want to say right off the bat that I'm going to talk very little about what Salesforce is doing, because what Salesforce is doing and what IBM is doing and what a lot of technology companies are doing right now in the face of our challenges are pretty much about the same. But what I would like to do, if you would indulge me, I'd like to take you just a little bit of a journey from where I've come from and how Dr. King has really impacted my life directly. I tell everyone that I'm a high-tech dinosaur. And I say that because when I started my career, there wasn't very much technology available to me. I had a typewriter. I learned to type on a manual typewriter, the ones you type and you throw the carriage. And actually I saw the whole internet and Silicon Valley come alive, being here in the Bay Area for nearly 40 years. But I say this, that I'm a high-tech dinosaur because I really walk between two worlds. The old world of when we were labeled colored and Negroes, to we're African Americans and we are leading vibrant lives, and we do not live in the shadow of the oppression that I grew up in. But I think it's important to understand a little bit about that and how that frames where we are today. I can say that I have lived under the administration of 11 presidents. I've witnessed the assassination of John F. Kennedy. I've seen the attempted assassination of 2 other presidents. I've seen the impeachment, 3 impeachments, 3 of the 4 impeachments that have been done historically in this country. I've witnessed 3 of them. I witnessed the assassination of MLK, Malcolm, John F. Kennedy, Robert Kennedy. I grew up in the segregated South. Well, Missouri, it was they couldn't make up their mind. So segregation is not something that's abstract to me because I grew up with segregated water fountains, toilets, theaters, restaurants, schools, and neighborhoods. In fact, in my neighborhood, the only time I ever saw white people was when they were coming to give us work or coming to take us to work. So it was a very, very different world from which we live today. My great-great-grandparents were enslaved in Albemarle County, Virginia. This is where Thomas Jefferson was from. And they came to the state of Missouri to help settle it. My great-grandmother, Ellen, I'm going to show you a picture of her. Born in 1870. She was the first generation of my family to be born out of slavery. So when you see people on the street and you see them in your businesses, the world of that world is not that far away. It's not that far from us, and that there are still traumas that we face every day that goes unwatched, goes below the surface. But there are those of us who witness these things, and we're here to tell the story today. I grew up in a segregated environment. My schooling was segregated. I was the first in my family to go to an integrated school. What they did at that time, they privatized kindergarten. And so I wasn't able to go to kindergarten. So my mother, she homeschooled me and she sent me to school early. So she learned how to game the system. And as a result of that, I was raised somewhat as an activist. We were educated to represent our people, to represent our culture, and that we were there for a purpose. And so when I went on to school later on, after Dr. King was assassinated, it was through his educational foundation that my college was financed. So it's a very, very direct relationship that I have with Dr. King. It's not abstract. So I'm very, very grateful for the sacrifice that this man made. The university where I went to school was primarily a white institution. Most of the people that I grew up around worked at this institution. And I think it was, I look back in retrospect and I think what my mother wanted us to do was to sit in the places where only white people were able to sit previously. They wanted us to represent. And I'm pleased to say that as a result of that education, I have been fearless. I also have returned to that institution and I sat on the board of trustees. So this was a university that was formed after the Civil War for young white girls who were orphaned, that I was educated and I now sit on the board of trustees. So when you hear people talk about it, not much has changed, let me tell you, a great deal has changed. My life has really been a study in self-determination, and it was supported by very, very diligent parents who literally preached us out the door every morning. Don't let anyone tell you what you can't do. You can do anything you set your mind to. And we believed it. And so every day we marched out and we went to school and we learned, but we also were there to represent our culture. So what was interesting was that my father was not very well educated. He had to leave school when he was in 3rd grade, but he believed in education. And so what he did was he drove a school bus 45 miles for Black kids to go to Lincoln University, one of the historically Black college and university in Jefferson City, Missouri. He drove students for 45 miles so that they could go to school. So this was not something that was, we had an option. We had to go and we had to be educated, and educated we were. It was because of that tenacious spirit that my parents instilled in me. It allowed me to walk in places that there weren't very many Black people. In fact, for a good 2 decades, there weren't very many people that looked like me anywhere. But it was because of that tenacious spirit that allowed me to walk up to Steve Jobs and tell him that he needed to hire me because he was on a fast track for an IPO, and he did. So I've had the pleasure of working with some of the most incredible minds coming from those gravel roads and segregated communities. I've been able to interface with folks like Steve Jobs and Mark Benioff. And so it's because of that I directly attribute to my relationship with Dr. King. But, you have to think about the Dr. King then and the Dr. King now. And our history of racism is really, really complicated. And the world that Dr. King sought to impact and the days that we see today, they're very, very similar. And it's not because things haven't changed, because they have. It's because the heartbeat of racism is rooted in denial. And so what we have to remember is that for every period that we've seen of racial progress, historically there has been, it's been followed by a period of backlash. And we've seen this ever since, post-slavery and Reconstruction. We got Jim Crow, we got the red shirts, and we got the KKK. And the Civil Rights Movement, we got Voting Rights and Civil Rights Acts, but we also got gerrymandering, and we got voter intimidation, and we had lynchings. And after the first Black president, we got the Tea Party and we got Trumpism. So we shouldn't be surprised with what we see. We should be prepared. Think about it. In the years between 1965 and 1968, there were 150 race riots and uprisings in this country, 150. So what we saw at the Capitol was probably a little bit on steroids, but it's not something that we haven't seen before. At that time, 34% of African Americans were below the poverty line. That number today is 24%. So yeah, we've made some progress, but we've got a great deal of progress to go. Keep in mind that the COVID pandemic created a she session. And when you think about it, 20% of African-American households are run by women. So when you're looking at what can you do to help, if you're not helping to amplify and lift up a Black woman, you're missing the mark. Because if you bring the level up for Black women, you raise the bar for everyone. So when everyone thinks about Dr. King, I can't tell you how many I have a dream emails I got yesterday and this morning. But Dr. King wrote about so much more. And I thought, well, what am I going to talk about today that would be relevant? I don't want to talk about I Have a Dream because everybody's heard that, right? But his fourth book was on where do we go from here? And I think that if you have an opportunity to go back and read that book, there was a great article that was on, let me see, what is it? It was on the news this morning about talking about that book exactly, and what did Dr. King encourage us to do in that work, because he was really frustrated too. You know, he had tried, nonviolence and it wasn't working really well. A lot of people were dying in the streets. And so he was trying to figure out what we needed to do to find our ways out of this situation. And really what we needed and what we need now is to develop an understanding of who we are and who we are meant to be. That's really important, and it's a very powerful thought. He quotes Thomas Paine in the book that we have the power to begin the world over again. And that's really where we are right now. We have to begin the world over again. And it's not a daunting task because we've done it again and again, and we will continue to do it again. We have to embrace the notion that no one's going to save us, but more importantly, we are the ones we've been waiting for. So what do we need to do? We need to bring all of our resources. We need to think about tearing off the blindfold of denial. We're in these great organizations with powerful people. We need to expose the fact that these incidents that we're experiencing they are racist acts, and they're not just created, or committed by a few bad apples, but that we have an opportunity to really, really bring transformative change to the political environment where these harmful ideologies do not take hold. And we each have a responsibility to make that thing happen. Because one other thing that he said, I thought, I want to make this quote. He said that the nature of evil and all of its tragic dimensions, you're going to find them in high places where men are willing to sacrifice truth on the altars of their self-interest. That's a powerful statement, and we should really be thoughtful about it. So I wanted to think about where do we go from here? And I think it's a call to action. It's an invocation. And I think there are basically three things, plus one bonus. One, I think I mentioned earlier, you got to bring your full resources to the aid of those less fortunate, right? So we have to bring our heart, we have to bring our mind, but we got to bring our checkbook because talk is cheap. Post George Floyd, corporate America, everybody and their brother has a $100 million fund. Let's make good on that. Okay? Let's stop talking about what we're going to do and let's start doing. We do have to start creating authentic connections. And we do that by amplifying each other. And that's what you see here today. That's what my sister Almaz did. She amplified me, I amplify her. That's how we get along. That's how we promote each other. That's how we grow. That's how we develop those authentic connections. We also have an obligation to elect officials at the state, local, and national levels who enact laws and regulations that ensure that the scene that played out in Washington does not become a symbol of it does become the symbol of the America that we're leaving behind, because we simply must. Our future really, really depends upon it. So what do? There are some critical things that we need right now. Voting Rights Act, election reform, the Electoral College. Somebody's got to figure out what to do with that thing. But more importantly, we need an economic Bill of Rights, access to education, employment incentives and opportunities. We need a living wage. It was on the pages this morning of the news feed. We need a living wage, and we need health care for everyone. If we cannot do that, and I know it's daunting, it was daunting at the time that Dr. King considered it. By the way, these things that those tenets that I just gave you, those were the same tenets that Dr. King wrote about in 1967. They're just as valid today as they were then. So we need to get back on the track, making sure that these things are at the forefront. And when we look back, a lot of what Dr. King talks about is the battle between, good and evil. And what he came away with was that evil never dies, but love always wins. So if we're the ones we've been waiting for, if not me, then who? If not now, then when?